Henry stood in the garden, the morning sun casting a warm glow over everything it touched. He had come a long way since regaining his sight, through months of doubt, heartbreak, and a desperate fight for redemption. Now, as he waited for Scarlett, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in what felt like forever. Seeing with the heart had become his new understanding, a realization that beauty wasn't just in the images captured by his eyes, but in the feelings and connections that had always been there. He had finally understood that the real beauty was in the love they had built together, even before he could see her face. Scarlett arrived, her presence filling the space around him with a familiar warmth. Henry could see the hesitation in her eyes, the fear that he might hurt her again. But he was determined to show her that he had changed. He had learned that love wasn't about appearances or the world's judgments. It was about the heart, the soul, and the connection they had shared from the beginning. The moment he saw her had been just the start of his journey to understanding the true depth of their love. Henry took Scarlett's hands in his eyes meeting hers with a sincerity that he hoped would convey everything he had learned. "I see you now, Scarlett," he said softly. "Not just with my eyes, but with my heart. I see the love, the strength, and the beauty that have always been there." Scarlett's eyes welled with tears as she listened, her heart swelling with hope. Henry continued, "The real beauty was here all along, in the love we built together, in the trust you placed in me, and in the person you are." The garden around them seemed to come alive with the beauty of the moment. Flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, the gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of nature, and the world felt right again. Henry knew that their journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but he was ready to face them together with Scarlett. He had finally understood that love was the greatest gift, and it had been within reach all along. All he had to do was open his heart and truly see. Henry and Scarlett's journey has shown us that love isn't found in appearances but in the connection of souls. Through darkness and light, doubt and redemption, they've taught us that true sight comes from the heart. As their story reaches this turning point, we want to hear from you. What moved you most in their journey? Did you expect their love to survive the trials of sight and doubt? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know if you'd like to see more stories like theirs. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, remember to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales of love, loss, and redemption. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on Henry and Scarlett's future together. Henry Carrick always knew love wasn't about sight. Love beyond sight was his mantra as he navigated the world without eyesight. His marriage to Scarlett Ali was a marriage built on trust that neither could have imagined. They exchanged vows in a ceremony filled with emotion, where the absence of visual connection only strengthened their bond. The moment he saw her, or rather the moment he felt her presence, changed everything for Henry. Their conversations flowed with ease, filled with blind Billionaire's awakening, as he realized true connection transcended physical appearance. Scarlett moved through their new life with grace, understanding that Henry's world was different. She described sunsets using words that painted pictures in his mind. Eyes open, heart torn. Henry often felt this way, knowing he couldn't see the woman who completed him. Yet, their love grew through shared experiences and vulnerability. Friends would ask how their relationship worked, to which Scarlett would simply say, "It's about the soul, not the eyes." This philosophy became their foundation, even as the world around them questioned their choice. The first year of marriage was filled with small victories. Scarlett would read to Henry from his favorite books, her voice a comfort that soothed his restless spirit. From darkness to betrayal wasn't part of their story. Not yet. Henry trusted Scarlett implicitly, a fact that surprised even his closest friends. "She married his soul" became the phrase that defined their union. When asked about their unique dynamic, Henry would respond with a smile. "Seeing the truth is overrated. Love reveals what truly matters. Challenges came in unexpected ways. Business meetings required adaptation, with Scarlett becoming Henry's eyes in more ways than one. The face behind the voice took on new meaning as colleagues learned to communicate through Henry's unique perspective. Scarlett never sought recognition for her role, seeing it as simply part of their partnership. Their evenings were filled with laughter and deep conversations, creating a foundation that seemed unshakable. Henry often thought how fortunate he was to have found someone who understood his world so completely. Financial matters, however, brought new stresses. As a billionaire, Henry's decisions affected many lives. Scarlett supported him through market fluctuations and high-stakes negotiations. Their late-night talks about business strategy became legendary among their inner circle. The blind groom's revelation came gradually as Henry realized Scarlett's business acumen rivaled his own. This mutual respect deepened their connection, proving that love and partnership could thrive even in the demanding world of finance. Their unity in business became a testament to their strength as a couple. Social events tested their bond in different ways. Scarlett would describe the room's layout to Henry, helping him navigate gatherings with confidence. When sight meets, heartbreak was a concept they both acknowledged but refused to let define them. Together, they faced critics who doubted their marriage's authenticity. Henry's inability to see never once made him question Scarlett's loyalty. Their love story became an inspiration to many, proving that, was it real love after all, had a definitive answer in their case. Intimacy developed on its own timeline, free from societal expectations. Scarlett ensured Henry never felt inadequate, their relationship evolving naturally. The physical aspects of their connection were just one part of a much deeper union. The day he finally saw her wasn't something they focused on, choosing instead to build a life rich with experiences that transcended sight. Their love language was clear: understanding, patience, and an unwavering commitment to each other's growth. Their bond grew strong through conversations that lasted until the early hours of the morning. Henry and Scarlett would talk about everything and nothing, creating a connection that defied the lack of visual cues. True love or deception was a question that never crossed their minds, as their relationship was built on genuine jiaoliu. Scarlett would share stories from her childhood, painting vivid pictures with her words that Henry could see in his mind's eye. Henry, in turn, would describe his business ventures with such passion that Scarlett could feel the excitement in his voice. This dance of communication became the cornerstone of their love. Laughter filled their home as they discovered shared interests and inside jokes. Scarlett would tease Henry about his inability to make coffee without spilling it everywhere, to which he would jokingly respond that he only needed her to handle such tasks. These light moments were interspersed with deep conversations about life, dreams, and fears. The moment he saw her might have been a physical impossibility, but Henry felt like he truly saw Scarlett through her words and actions. Their love wasn't about appearance. It was about the person behind the voice. Kindness manifested in countless small gestures. Scarlett would leave notes around the house with encouraging messages, knowing Henry would discover them throughout his day. Henry would surprise her with her favorite flowers, remembering how she once mentioned their scent brought her joy. These acts of thoughtfulness strengthened their connection. Friends often marveled at how well suited they were, even without the conventional visual attraction. Eyes open, heart torn, wasn't part of their experience. Their hearts were whole in each other's company. The world they were building together was a testament to their unique love. They renovated their home together, with Scarlett describing color palettes and furniture layouts that Henry would approve based on her detailed explanations. From darkness to betrayal was a path they never walked, choosing instead to face challenges hand in hand. Their teamwork extended to their social life, where Scarlett would introduce Henry to new experiences, and he would support her ambitions with unwavering belief. This partnership became the envy of many who witnessed Intimacy developed in its own way, free from societal expectations. Scarlett ensured Henry never felt inadequate, their relationship evolving naturally. The physical aspects of their connection were just one part of a much deeper union. The face behind the voice took on new meaning as they discovered new dimensions of each other through touch and presence. Their love language was clear: understanding, patience, and an unwavering commitment to each other's growth. Henry often thought how fortunate he was to have found someone who understood his world so completely. Challenges came in the form of misunderstandings that were quickly resolved through open communication. When Henry was stressed from work, Scarlett would sense it in his tone and offer a listening ear. Scarlett's busy schedule sometimes made her tired, and Henry would take over household tasks to give her a break. Their ability to support each other through these moments became legendary among their friends. The blind groom's revelation came gradually as Henry realized that love without sight was not only possible but deeply fulfilling. Their relationship proved that connection transcended physical appearance. The depth of their bond was evident to everyone around them. Visitors to their home would often comment on the palpable connection between Henry and Scarlett. Their love wasn't just a feeling, it was a way of life. They faced the world together, confident in their unique partnership. When sight meets heartbreak was a concept they acknowledged but refused to let define them. Their love was real, tangible, and beautifully different, a love that didn't need eyes to see its truth. The world Henry and Scarlett built together was a sanctuary of mutual support and unwavering devotion. Scarlett's strength became his anchor during the stormiest nights. When business deals fell through and financial markets crashed, it was Scarlett's calm voice that guided Henry back from the edge of despair. From darkness to betrayal was a path they navigated together, with Scarlett's intuition often steering them clear of potential pitfalls. She became his eyes in more ways than one, reading between the lines of contracts and sensing when a partner's intentions were less than honorable. Their unity in facing professional challenges became the stuff of legends in the business world, where their partnership was seen as a rare example of true collaboration. Personal trials tested their bond in ways that only brought them closer. Henry's moments of doubt, when the weight of his empire felt overwhelming, were met with Scarlett's gentle reminders of their journey together. "She married his soul" was more than a phrase to them. It was a lived reality. Scarlett would recount their early days, when their love was just beginning to bloom, helping Henry remember that their foundation was built on something far more enduring than financial success. These moments of reflection became their therapy, a way to reconnect when the stress of the world threatened to pull them apart. The darkest moments revealed the true depth of their connection. When Henry faced a serious health scare unrelated to his blindness, Scarlett's presence was unwavering. She slept in the hospital chair beside his bed, her hand never leaving his. Seeing the truth about their love became crystal clear during those nights. This was a love that could withstand any trial. Friends and family marveled at Scarlett's resilience as she balanced Henry's medical needs with the demands of their business empire. Her ability to hold everything together without cracking under pressure became a quiet testament to her strength. Their home became a reflection of their shared world, filled with meaningful objects that told their story. Scarlett had a knack for finding pieces that spoke to their journey, artwork that seemed to capture the essence of their connection, furniture that invited warmth and conversation. Henry would often run his fingers over these items, feeling the texture and hearing Scarlett's explanations of why each piece mattered. The face behind the voice took on new meaning as he associated each object with a memory of Scarlett's laughter, her encouragement, or her quiet strength during difficult times. Their space became a physical manifestation of their bond. Support extended beyond words into actions that spoke volumes. Scarlett learned the intricate details of Henry's business, becoming a strategic partner whose insights were valued by his executive team. She attended meetings with him, translating visual presentations into detailed descriptions that allowed Henry to make informed decisions. The blind groom's revelation came in moments when Henry realized how much Scarlett had sacrificed professionally to support him. She had given up her own career aspirations to stand by his side, a fact that humbled him deeply. Their love was a two-way street, with Henry consistently seeking ways to honor Scarlett's ambitions, even as she supported his. The birth of their first child together brought new dimensions to their world. Scarlett navigated motherhood with the same grace and strength that defined her approach to everything. Henry experienced the miracle of their baby's arrival through her excited descriptions and the tiny hand that eventually found its way into his palm. When sight meets heartbreak became a thing of the past as they welcomed new life into their carefully built world. Friends noted how natural parenthood seemed for them, as if their years of supporting each other had prepared them perfectly for this next chapter. Their love, already deep, found new expression in their shared journey of raising a family. Even in moments of exhaustion, their commitment to each other never wavered. Late nights with a crying baby found them working as a team, with Scarlett guiding Henry through the rhythm of soothing their child. Business calls were handled with Scarlett whispering updates beside him, ensuring nothing fell through the cracks. Was it real love after all? Was a question that never entered their minds. This was real, tangible, and beautifully messy in all the ways that mattered. Their world, built on faith and fortified by love, had become a place where they faced every challenge together, emerging stronger with each test. The news arrived like a bolt from the blue, shattering the carefully constructed world Henry and Scarlett had built together. Dr. Eleanor Reed, a pioneering ophthalmologist with a reputation for medical miracles, delivered the life-changing announcement during a routine checkup. "There's a new surgical procedure, Mr. Carrick," she began. Her voice was cautious yet hopeful. "It's experimental with a 40% success rate, but it could restore your sight." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility and peril. From darkness to betrayal flickered through Scarlett's mind as she gripped Henry's hand, her knuckles whitening with the force of her grip. This was the moment they had both secretly feared and hoped for. A chance at a different life. But at what cost? Henry's initial reaction was a mix of excitement and trepidation. The idea of seeing Scarlett's face, the one that had haunted his dreams and fueled his imagination for years, sent a thrill through him. He pictured her features in his mind, the way her voice seemed to suggest warm brown hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. But then doubt crept in. "What if I don't see her the way I imagine?" he whispered during their drive home, his voice breaking ever so slightly. Scarlett's heart ached as she reached over to squeeze his hand. "Even if you don't, Henry, I'll still be the same person you fell in love with," she replied, though her own confidence wavered. The moment he saw her had always been a sacred concept between them, a hypothetical future they'd discussed in abstract terms but never truly prepared for. The days following the news were filled with frantic research and discussions. Henry immersed himself in medical journals, his fingers flying over the braille translations of complex procedures as Scarlett read aloud additional information she'd uncovered online. They weighed the risks, the 60% chance of failure, potential complications, the possibility that his vision might be impaired rather than restored. Love beyond sight was their mantra during these tense conversations, a reminder of the foundation of their relationship. Yet the allure of sight was powerful. Scarlett found herself Googling images of couples seeing each other for the first time after medical miracles, her throat tightening at the emotional photos. The blind groom's revelation felt inevitable, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for the world to see her through Henry's eyes, or for Henry to see her at all. Friends and family began weighing in, their opinions adding to the pressure. Henry's mother, Margaret Carrick, was cautiously optimistic. "Imagine the business opportunities, Henry," she mused during a family dinner, her practical nature shining through. You could regain independence in ways you never thought possible. Scarlett's father, on the other hand, voiced concerns that mirrored her deepest fears. "What if this changes everything between you two?" he asked quietly one evening when they visited for tea. "What if the person he imagined isn't the person he sees?" Scarlett's hands trembled as she set down her cup, her mind racing. Was it real love after all? Echoed in the silence that followed, a question that hung between them like a threat. The decision couldn't be put off indefinitely. Surgeons scheduled appointments, specialists requested additional tests, and the media, always hungry for a story about the reclusive billionaire, began catching wind of the potential procedure. Reporters camped outside Henry's clinics, speculating about whether the blind billionaire's awakening would be a fairy tale ending or a tragic downfall. Scarlett handled the press with her usual grace, issuing brief statements that emphasized privacy while deflecting invasive questions. Inside their sanctuary, however, the tension mounted. Henry practiced looking in mirrors with his eyes closed, trying to reorient himself to a world he might soon see. Scarlett found herself adjusting her appearance subconsciously, fixing her hair more carefully, choosing brighter outfits, a habit she would have laughed at weeks earlier, but now couldn't shake. As the surgery date approached, their nightly talks grew more intense. Henry confessed fears he'd never voiced before, that he might not recognize the world he'd built through touch and sound. "What if colors disappoint me?" he asked one evening, his voice vulnerable. "What if the world isn't as beautiful as your descriptions made it seem?" Scarlett countered with her own anxieties, though she framed them as hypotheticals. "What if I become self-conscious under your gaze?" she wondered aloud. "What if the way you see me changes how you feel about me?" These late-night conversations were a dance of vulnerability, each admission strengthening their bond even as they faced the unknown. Eyes open, heart torn felt like an impending reality, yet they pressed forward, determined to face whatever came next together. The morning of the surgery arrived with a mix of determination and dread. Henry lay on the operating table, Scarlett's hand clasped tightly in his. Dr. Reed's team bustled around them, their professionalism a contrast to the emotional weight in the room. As anesthesia began to take effect, Henry turned to Scarlett with a rare show of vulnerability. "No matter what happens," he whispered, his voice cracking, "remember that I chose you, not for how you look, but for who you are." Scarlett's eyes glistened with tears as she nodded, her heart swelling with love and fear. As consciousness faded, she pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, whispering the words that had anchored them for years. "Love beyond sight," she murmured, closing her eyes against the uncertainty of the future. Scarlett's silent fears began as a whisper and gradually grew into a roar that threatened to drown out her confidence. As Henry's surgery date drew closer, she found herself standing before mirrors for longer periods, scrutinizing her reflection with a critical eye. "What if I'm not what he imagined?" she murmured to her reflection one morning, tracing the lines of her face as if committing them to memory. Her mind raced with possibilities. What if Henry had pictured her as elegant and sophisticated, while she felt merely ordinary? The doubt gnawed at her, a silent predator in the corners of her mind. From darkness to betrayal wasn't just a phrase from their past. It now represented her fear that light might reveal something Henry wouldn't accept. She caught herself altering her routine in subtle yet telling ways. Clothing choices that once prioritized comfort now leaned toward styles that accentuated her figure. Colors that promised to catch the light should Henry's surgery succeed. The moment he saw her had always been a theoretical concept, a future they'd discussed without real consideration of its weight. Now, it loomed like an inevitability, and Scarlett was unprepared for the anxiety that came with it. She rehearsed. Smiles in front of mirrors, practiced poised movements, as though preparing for an audition where the stakes were her marriage and Henry's heart. "Love beyond sight?" felt like a fragile promise in these moments of self-doubt. Friends noticed the change in her, though Scarlett deflected their concerns with forced laughter and light remarks. Just wedding jitters, she'd dismiss, though their wedding had been years ago. Her best friend Lena wasn't so easily convinced. "You know he loves you for who you are, right?" Lena asked during a coffee outing, her tone gentle but firm. Scarlett nodded, but her reflection in the window cafe told a different story. One of a woman questioning whether she'd be enough for a man who was about to see the world, and her, for the first time. The blind groom's revelation was no longer just Henry's potential awakening. It was Scarlett's brutal confrontation with insecurities she'd never acknowledged. The physical manifestations of her anxiety were impossible to ignore. Sleepless nights found her tossing in bed, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. What if Henry's gaze held disappointment? What if he saw her and felt a distance open between them, the kind that not even love could bridge? She began journaling these fears in the quiet hours before dawn, filling pages with questions that had no answers. Was it real love after all? She wrote, her pen pausing as though waiting for the words to betray her deepest truth. The journal became both confidant and tormentor, reflecting back her doubts in ink that couldn't be erased. In moments of vulnerability, she'd find Henry's hand and hold it tightly, as though trying to memorize the feel of his skin against hers, one last anchor to a love that existed beyond sight. He'd sense her unease and draw her close, whispering assurances that their bond transcended the physical. Yet Scarlett's mind would drift to the when sight meets heartbreak stories she'd read online, tales of couples whose relationships crumbled when fantasy met reality. She knew intellectually that their love was stronger, deeper, but the fear was a living thing, breathing and shifting with each passing day. She married his soul, she'd remind herself, but the phrase felt like a question now rather than a statement of fact. Their intimate moments, once a source of comfort, now carried an undercurrent of tension. Scarlett would pull away before Henry could fully embrace her, her body betraying the anxiety she tried to hide. He'd ask if she was well, and she'd feign tiredness or stress from daily tasks. The distance growing between them wasn't just a product of her imagination. It was a real, tangible thing that neither could name. The face behind the voice had always been known to Henry through touch and conversation, but now Scarlett wondered if those experiences would be overshadowed by the first look in Henry's eyes, a look that might change everything. Love, she realized, was about to be redefined in ways she couldn't yet understand. As the day of Henry's potential sight restoration drew near, Scarlett's fears crystallized into a single, paralyzing thought. What if the gift of vision became a wedge between them? What if the world Henry had built in his mind, where her voice was enough and her presence complete, clashed irreconcilably with reality? She confided in no one, wrapping herself in a cocoon of silence and worry. The love they'd shared effortlessly was about to be tested in ways that had nothing to do with the surgery's medical success, and everything to do with the fragile human hearts involved. Eyes open, heart torn, wasn't just a dramatic phrase from their favorite song. It was the anthem of Scarlett's waking nightmare, playing on repeat as she awaited the moment that might change everything. The hospital room was a cacophony of controlled chaos as Henry prepared for the surgery that might change everything. Scarlett paced outside the operating room like a caged animal, her heels clicking a nervous rhythm against the sterile floor. Friends and family had gathered, their presence both comforting and suffocating. Henry's mother, Margaret, clutched, a rosary beads between her fingers, her lips moving in silent prayer. Dr. Reed emerged briefly to offer an encouraging smile, but the tension in the room was inescapable. The moment he saw her felt oddly irrelevant now. What mattered was the present moment, filled with uncertainty and the weight of what might be lost. Scarlett's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more devastating than the last. Inside, the operating room, Henry lay still under the blinding lights, his heart monitor emitting a steady beep that Scarlett had grown to dread. The surgical team worked in practiced silence, their movements precise yet urgent. Scarlett had been allowed to stay until the anesthesia took full effect, and she had pressed a final kiss to Henry's forehead before the nurses gently guided her out. Love beyond sight had been their guiding principle, but now it felt fragile against the clinical reality of the situation. The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity filled with doubt and fear. As the surgery progressed, the medical team encountered unexpected complications. Henry's vitals fluctuated alarmingly at one point, sending the room into a brief frenzy of activity. Dr. Reed's calm instructions anchored the team as they navigated the crisis, but Scarlett, waiting outside, was unaware of the drama unfolding behind the doors. Her imagination filled the void with horrors. Henry waking up blind as before, or worse, not waking up at all. From darkness to betrayal wasn't just a fear now, it was a possibility that gnawed at her with each passing minute. She texted brief updates to friends, her thumbs moving mechanically over the phone's screen. When the surgical team finally emerged, their expressions were unreadable. Dr. Reed approached Scarlett, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "The surgery went as well as could be expected," she began, her voice steady. "We won't know the full outcome for a few days, but there were positive signs during the procedure." Scarlett's knees nearly buckled with relief, though she forced herself to remain standing. "Can I see him?" she managed, her voice cracking. The doctor nodded, and Scarlett followed her into the recovery room, where Henry lay pale and still, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the ventilator. In the quiet aftermath, Scarlett held Henry's hand, her thumb tracing gentle circles over his knuckles. The monitors beeped rhythmically, a soundtrack to the tension that filled the room. Henry's eyes remained closed, and Scarlett found herself whispering promises into the silence. "I'll be here when you wake up. No matter what happens, I'm not leaving." Her words mirrored the vows they'd exchanged years earlier, though the circumstances were vastly different. The blind groom's revelation had always been a future they faced together. Now, it was a present that demanded all her strength and faith. As the first hours of recovery passed, the medical staff monitored Henry's condition closely. Scarlett barely noticed when Margaret relieved her for a few hours of rest, her mind too focused on Henry's still form. When she finally slept, it was fitfully, her dreams filled with fragmented images of Henry seeing her for the first time, sometimes with joy, sometimes with confusion, always with intensity. Was it real love after all? Echoed through her dreamscape. A question she couldn't fully silence even in sleep. Back at the hospital, Henry's condition remained stable, a fragile equilibrium that offered small hope for the future. The days following the surgery were marked by incremental progress and heart-stopping setbacks. Henry's eyes remained bandaged as his body healed from the invasive procedure. Scarlett read to him from his favorite books, her voice a steadying presence in the otherwise sterile environment. When his bandages were finally removed, the room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Henry blinked against the harsh hospital lights, his vision blurred and uncertain. Scarlett's breath hitched as she watched his expression, a mix of confusion and wonder. "Can you see me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotions she couldn't name. Henry turned his head slowly toward the sound of her voice, his eyes focusing on her face for the first time. The moment stretched, infinite and charged with the weight of their journey together. Henry's eyes fluttered open to a world he'd only known through touch and sound, the hospital room slowly coming into focus through the haze of post-surgery grogginess. Scarlett sat beside him, her posture rigid with anticipation, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Henry?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. He turned his head toward the sound of her voice, his vision still blurred but gradually clearing. "Scarlett," he murmured, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. The first thing he saw was her eyes, large, expressive, and filled with unshed tears. They were a striking shade of hazel, flecked with gold, exactly the kind of eyes he'd imagined belonging to the woman he loved. "You're even more beautiful than I pictured," he breathed, reaching out a tentative hand toward her face. Scarlett caught his hand before it could touch her cheek, pressing a gentle kiss to his palm. "Don't strain yourself," she whispered, though her own composure was slipping. She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, imagined the words he might say, the look in his eyes. Nothing had prepared her for the reality of being seen, not just by Henry, but by the world he was rediscovering. "How does everything look?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Henry scanned the room slowly, taking in the sterile white walls, the blinking monitors, the bouquet of flowers she'd placed by the window. "Bright," he said simply. "Everything is so bright and colorful. I didn't realize how much I'd missed it." Scarlett's heart ached at the wonder in his voice, a wonder that didn't yet fully include her. The medical staff entered the room with quiet efficiency, checking Henry's vitals and adjusting the lighting to ease the strain on his newly awakened eyes. Scarlett stepped back, allowing them space while her mind raced. The moment he saw her had arrived, and it was both everything she'd hoped for and nothing like she'd expected. Henry's gaze had lingered on her face with the intensity that made her feel seen in a new way. Yet there was a distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Love beyond sight had been their truth. But now it felt like a chapter, closing rather than the whole story. She watched as Henry interacted with the nurses, his questions eager and curious, and wondered if this was the beginning of the end or just another chapter in their evolving love. When they were finally alone again, Henry turned to Scarlett with a thoughtful expression. "Tell me everything I've missed," he said, his voice filled with a newfound excitement. Scarlett hesitated, her mind flashing to the countless moments they'd shared in the dark, intimate conversations, quiet laughter, shared tears that he'd never seen. How could she explain the beauty of a sunset he'd only experienced through her descriptions? How would he understand the comfort of a home he'd navigated by memory and touch? "There's so much," she began, her voice catching. "But none of it matters if it changes how you see us." Henry reached for her hand again, his grip firmer this time. "It doesn't change anything," he assured her. "You're still the same woman I fell in love with, the one who held me together when I felt like falling apart." Scarlett wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room. As days passed and Henry's vision slowly sharpened, Scarlett noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He would stare at objects around the room, trying to commit their appearances to memory. He'd ask her to describe people they'd known for years, his questions revealing how much he wanted to catch up with a world he'd missed. Scarlett answered patiently, though each question felt like a step further away from the bond they'd built in the dark. The face behind the voice had always been a concept they'd laughed about, how their imaginations had filled in the gaps. Now, reality was filling those gaps, and Scarlett wasn't sure she liked the new picture forming in Henry's mind. She caught herself comparing her reflection to the image she'd painted for him, wondering if she measured up to his expectations. Henry's rehabilitation process was marked by moments of triumph and frustration. Some days he'd grow excited by simple things, the play of light through a window, the expression on a friend's face during a visit. Other days he'd retreat into silence, overwhelmed by the bombardment of visual information. Scarlett supported him through it all, offering guidance when he struggled to navigate spaces he'd once moved through with confidence. From darkness to betrayal wasn't a path they walked, but the strain was evident in the unspoken tension between them. Henry's new perspective was changing him, and Scarlett feared she was losing the man she'd married to someone she didn't yet recognize. Yet she stayed by his side, determined to help him through this transition, even as her own heart ached with uncertainty. Late one evening, As Henry practiced navigating their home with the aid of a cane he insisted on using temporarily, Scarlett watched from the doorway. His movements were hesitant but deliberate, each step a small victory. "Do you remember the first time we danced here?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Henry paused, turning toward the sound of her voice. "How could I forget?" he replied with a smile. "You tripped over your own feet and blamed it on the music." Scarlett laughed, the sound easing some of the tension between them. "I was nervous," she admitted. "I always am when I'm with you." Henry set the cane aside and crossed the room to her, his steps growing surer. "Nothing's changed," he said, taking her hands in his. "I'm still the same man who fell in love with you without ever seeing your face." Scarlett wanted to believe him, and in that moment, she chose to. As Henry's vision continued to improve, an unspoken tension began to settle between him and Scarlett like a heavy fog. One evening, while sharing a quiet dinner together, Henry's expression shifted in a way that sent a chill down Scarlett's spine. He stared at her across the table, his newly sighted eyes lingering on her face with an intensity that was different from the wonder he'd shown earlier. "Your eyes," he began, his voice trailing off as though searching for the right words. Scarlett's heart raced. "Yes?" she prompted softly, her earlier confidence now frayed at the edges. Henry hesitated, then said quietly, "They're not what I imagined." The room fell silent, the words hanging like a verdict. Scarlett's fork clattered to her plate as she struggled to process what he'd said. "How so?" she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Henry looked away, rubbing his temples as though battling a headache. "I don't know," he sighed. I had this picture in my mind, and now—" His inability to finish the sentence spoke volumes, and Scarlett felt the first tremor of doubt take root in her heart. The days that followed were marked by awkward pauses and careful sidesteps around the elephant in the room. Henry grew increasingly distant, his attention often drifting as Scarlett spoke, as though he were really seeing her for the first time and didn't much care for what he found. Scarlett tried to shrug it off as post-surgery adjustment, telling herself that everything would return to normal once Henry grew accustomed to his new reality. But deep down, she knew this was different. Eyes open, heart torn had become their unspoken anthem as tiny fissures began to appear in their once solid bond. Scarlett noticed the way Henry would glance at her and quickly look away, the way his touches had become more tentative, almost polite. The man who had once traced her, features in the dark with such familiarity, now seemed to regard her with a stranger's caution. One particularly tense afternoon, as Scarlett bustled around the kitchen preparing Henry's favorite meal in an effort to reconnect, Henry sat at the counter watching her with an inscrutable expression. "Why are you doing that?" he asked suddenly, his tone flat. Scarlett froze, a forkful of pasta halfway to her mouth. "Doing what?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "All this." Henry gestured vaguely around the room. "The cooking, the effort. It's like you're trying too hard." Scarlett's carefully maintained composure cracked. "Maybe I am," she snapped, her voice sharper than intended. "Maybe I am trying too hard because I'm terrified of losing you." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unvarnished. Henry opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, his expression unreadable. For the first time since his surgery, Scarlett wondered if she'd ever really known this man at all. Henry's distance continued to grow, and with it came a coldness that Scarlett couldn't reconcile with the man she'd married. He began spending more time at the office, citing work as an excuse to avoid their shared space. When he was home, he'd retreat to his study, often staying there until Scarlett had fallen asleep. The intimacy they'd once shared evaporated like morning mist beneath the sun. The blind groom's revelation had been a hoped-for moment of connection, but instead, it became the catalyst for disconnection. Scarlett found herself questioning everything: their conversations, their shared memories, even the depth of Henry's love. Was it real love after all? Echoed in the silent rooms of their now strained existence. Friends tried to reassure her that relationships went through phases, but Scarlett knew this was no ordinary rough patch. This was the consequence of a fundamental shift in how Henry saw the world and her place in it. The physical changes in their relationship became impossible to ignore. Henry no longer initiated touch. Even their customary morning hugs felt forced and brief. Scarlett caught herself longing for the days when his hands had wandered her body with confidence born of familiarity, not this new hesitancy that suggested he was seeing her for the first time and finding her wanting. From darkness to betrayal. Wasn't just a fear now. It was a lived reality, as Scarlett began to suspect that Henry's heart was retreating as rapidly as his eyes were adjusting to the light. She tried to initiate conversations about their growing distance, but Henry would shut down, claiming he just needed time to adjust. Scarlett understood intellectually that sight was a game changer, but the pain of being pushed away by the man.
She loved cut deeper than any rational understanding could soothe.
One evening, as they sat across from each other on the living room sofa, a space that had once been the heart of their connection, Henry spoke the words that crystallized Scarlett's worst fears. "I need some space," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over her shoulder. Scarlett's breath hitched. "Space," she repeated, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. "What does that even mean?" Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. A gesture Scarlett recognized as a sign of his own inner turmoil. "I don't know," he admitted. I need to figure some things out. Things about us." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Things about how seeing her had changed everything. Scarlett's eyes pricked with tears, but she blinked them away determinedly. "So this is it then?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "After everything we've been through, you're pulling away because I'm not what you pictured?" Henry opened his mouth to protest, but Scarlett held up a hand. "Save it," she said softly. "Just save it." As Henry's vision continued to improve, an unspoken tension began to settle between him and Scarlett like a heavy fog. One evening, while sharing a quiet dinner together, Henry's expression shifted in a way that sent a chill down Scarlett's spine. He stared at her across the table, his newly sighted eyes lingering on her face with an intensity that was different from the wonder he'd shown earlier. "Your eyes," he began, his voice trailing off as though searching for the right words. Scarlett's heart raced. "Yes?" she prompted softly, her earlier confidence now frayed at the edges. Henry hesitated, then said quietly, "They're not what I imagined." The room fell silent, the words hanging like a verdict. Scarlett's fork clattered to her plate as she struggled to process what he'd said. "How so?" she managed, her voice steadier. Then she felt. Henry looked away, rubbing his temples as though battling a headache. "I don't know," he sighed. I had this picture in my mind, and now." His inability to finish the sentence spoke volumes, and Scarlett felt the first tremor of doubt take root in her heart. The days that followed were marked by awkward pauses and careful sidesteps around the elephant in the room. Henry grew increasingly distant, his attention often drifting as Scarlett spoke, as though he were really seeing her for the first time, and didn't much care for what he found. Scarlett tried to shrug it off as post-surgery adjustment, telling herself that everything would return to normal once Henry grew accustomed to his new reality. But deep down, she knew this was different. Eyes open, heart torn had become their unspoken anthem as tiny fissures began to appear in their once solid bond. Scarlett noticed the way Henry would glance at her and quickly look away, the way his touches had become more tentative, almost polite. The man who had once traced her features in the dark with such familiarity now seemed to regard her with a stranger's caution. One particularly tense afternoon, as Scarlett bustled around the kitchen preparing Henry's favorite meal in an effort to reconnect, Henry sat at the counter, watching her with an inscrutable expression. "Why are you doing that?" he asked suddenly, his tone flat. Scarlett froze, a forkful of pasta halfway to her mouth. "Doing what?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "All this," Henry gestured vaguely around the room. "The cooking, the effort. It's like you're trying too hard." Scarlett's carefully maintained composure cracked. "Maybe I am," she snapped, her voice sharper than intended. "Maybe I am trying too hard because I'm terrified of losing you." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unvarnished. Henry opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, his expression unreadable. For the first time since his surgery, Scarlett wondered if she'd ever really known this man at all. Henry's distance continued to grow, and with it came a coldness that Scarlett couldn't reconcile with the man she'd married. He began spending more time at the office, citing work as an excuse to avoid their shared space. When he was home, he'd retreat to his study, often staying there until Scarlett had fallen asleep. The intimacy they'd once shared evaporated like morning mist beneath the sun. The blind groom's revelation had been a hoped-for moment of connection, but instead, it became the catalyst for disconnection. Scarlett found herself questioning everything: their conversations, their shared memories, even the depth of Henry's love. Was it real love after all? Echoed in the silent rooms of their now strained existence. Friends tried to reassure her that relationships went through phases, but Scarlett knew this was no ordinary rough patch. This was the consequence of a fundamental shift in how Henry saw the world, and her place in it. The physical changes in their relationship became impossible to ignore. Henry no longer initiated touch. Even their customary morning hugs felt forced and brief. Scarlett caught herself longing for the days when his hands had wandered her body with confidence born of familiarity, not this new hesitancy that suggested he was seeing her for the first time and finding her wanting. From darkness to betrayal. Wasn't just a fear now. It was a lived reality, as Scarlett began to suspect that Henry's heart was retreating as rapidly as his eyes were adjusting to the light. She tried to initiate conversations about their growing distance, but Henry would shut down, claiming he just needed time to adjust. Scarlett understood intellectually that sight was a game changer, but the pain of being pushed away by the man.
She loved cut deeper than any rational understanding could soothe.
One evening, as they sat across from each other on the living room sofa, a space that had once been the heart of their connection, Henry spoke the words that crystallized Scarlett's worst fears. "I need some space," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over her shoulder. Scarlett's breath hitched. "Space," she repeated, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. "What does that even mean?" Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. A gesture Scarlett recognized as a sign of his own inner turmoil. "I don't know," he admitted. I need to figure some things out. Things about us." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Things about how seeing her had changed everything. Scarlett's eyes pricked with tears, but she blinked them away determinedly. "So this is it then?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "After everything we've been through, you're pulling away because I'm not what you pictured." Henry opened his mouth to protest, but Scarlett held up a hand. "Save it," she said softly. "Just save it." The distance between Henry and Scarlett widened with each passing day, creating a chasm neither knew how to bridge. Henry's once warm and familiar touch had become distant and mechanical, as though he were afraid to truly connect with the woman he now saw. Scarlett noticed how he would flinch when she reached for his hand, how his embrace during their rare moments of intimacy felt forced rather than natural. Love beyond sight had been their guiding principle, but now it seemed like a distant memory. The man who had once known every contour of her body through touch now seemed to regard her with the detachment of a stranger. Scarlett would often catch Henry staring at her across the room, his expression unreadable, a mix of confusion and something darker that she couldn't quite identify. The moment he saw her had been the beginning of the end, and both of them knew it. Conversations grew strained and filled with awkward silences that screamed with unspoken thoughts. Henry would speak about trivial matters, the weather, business deals, the latest developments in his recovery, while avoiding any mention of their relationship or the future they had once planned together. Scarlett tried to initiate deeper conversations to understand what was happening behind the walls he was so carefully constructing. "Henry, talk to me," she would plead during moments when his guard was slightly lowered. "Tell me what you're thinking." But he would always deflect, offering vague responses that shed no light on the confusion swirling in his mind. "I'm fine," he would say, his tone cold and dismissive. "Everything's fine." But Scarlett could see the lie in his eyes. The same eyes that had once filled her with hope and now filled her with dread. Henry's behavior began to change in subtle yet noticeable ways that alarmed Scarlett. He started spending more time at his office, using work as an excuse to avoid the home they had once shared with such joy. When he was forced to be present, he would retreat to his study, immersing himself in work or simply staring out the window, as though searching for answers in the passing clouds. From darkness to betrayal wasn't just a fear anymore. It was a reality that Scarlett was living. Day by day, she found herself questioning every memory they had shared, wondering if any of it had been genuine or if it had all been a carefully constructed illusion. Was it real love after all, echoed in her mind like a haunting melody she couldn't escape? Friends noticed the change in their dynamic and offered concerned looks and whispered questions, but Scarlett couldn't find the words to explain what was happening between them. The physical space between them expanded as well, each avoiding the other's presence whenever possible. Henry would sleep in the guest room rather than join Scarlett in their shared bed, claiming he needed the quiet to focus on his recovery. Scarlett would wake in the night to an empty space beside her, the cold sheets a reminder of the growing distance between them. She began to dread the moments when their paths would cross, the awkwardness and tension making even the simplest interactions painful. The blind groom's revelation had been a moment of potential connection, but now it felt like the revelation of everything that had been lost. Scarlett would often find herself staring at Henry's closed study door, her hand hovering over the knob, wanting desperately to break through the barrier he had built, but terrified of what she might find on the other side. The once vibrant love they shared began to fade under the weight of Henry's withdrawal. Scarlett's attempts to reignite the spark that had defined their relationship fell on deaf ears. She would plan romantic dinners, only to have Henry pick at his food and leave early under the pretense of work. She would suggest revisiting places that held special meaning to them, but he would decline, citing his need for space and time to adjust to his new reality. "Eyes open, heart torn" became the anthem of their crumbling relationship as Scarlett watched the man she loved slip further away with each passing day. The love they had once shared so freely was now met with resistance and confusion, leaving Scarlett to wonder if any part of it had ever truly existed or if it had all been a beautiful illusion born of darkness. As weeks turned into months, the situation showed no signs of improvement. Henry's distance became a permanent fixture in their lives, a silent wall that neither knew how to tear down. Scarlett found herself living in a state of constant anxiety, always on edge and waiting for the other shoe to drop. She began to question everything about their relationship, their conversations, their shared memories, even the depth of Henry's love. True love or deception wasn't just a question anymore. It was the reality they were living. Friends tried to offer support, but Scarlett felt increasingly isolated, as though she were the only one witnessing the slow disintegration of their once beautiful love. The man she had married was slipping away, and there seemed to be nothing she could do to bring him back. The final straw came one evening when Henry returned home unusually late. Scarlett had waited up for him, her heart heavy with anticipation and fear. When he finally entered the room, his eyes, those eyes that had once seen her soul, were cold and distant. "We need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Scarlett's stomach dropped as she braced herself for the conversation. That would change everything. "About what?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. Henry hesitated, then said quietly, "I think it's best if I move out for a while." The words hit Scarlett like a physical blow, stealing her breath and leaving her momentarily speechless. "Is this about what you see when you look at me?" she asked, her voice breaking. Henry's expression softened slightly, but he didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Scarlett to pick up the pieces of a heart that was slowly shattering. Henry found himself adrift in a sea of doubt, every certainty he'd once held about his relationship with Scarlett now called into question. As his vision sharpened, so did his perception of the world, and of the woman who had been his wife for years. He replayed their conversations in his mind, wondering if the connection he'd felt was real or merely a product of his imagination. Filling in the blanks. Was it real love after all? Became a haunting refrain that echoed in the silence of his study as he sat alone late into the night. The memories that had once been his anchor now felt uncertain, like a ship losing its moorings in a storm. He remembered the first time Scarlett had laughed with him, the warmth of her voice, and wondered if he had idealized her in the absence of sight. Maybe he had built a fantasy, a perfect image of a woman who may never have existed beyond his mind. His insecurity manifested in strange ways. He would follow Scarlett around the house, studying her movements as though she were a stranger. He noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the slight limp she had when she walked too long in heels, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. These details didn't match the image he had carried in his mind, and the discrepancy unsettled him. He began to question whether he had ever truly known her, or if he had simply fallen in love with the idea of her. Love beyond sight had been his mantra, but now it felt like a curse that had blinded him to the reality of their relationship. He wondered if his love had been nothing more than a desperate need for connection, a need that Scarlett had filled simply by being there. The business world offered little distraction from his turmoil. Colleagues and associates who had once been envious of his union with Scarlett now exchanged knowing looks that Henry couldn't decipher but felt like a punch to the gut. Rumors began to circulate, subtle at first, then more persistent, about whether Scarlett had been playing a role, performing a carefully constructed image of the perfect wife for the blind billionaire. The moment he saw her became a topic of idle speculation in boardrooms and at social events. Henry overheard fragments of conversations that made his blood run cold. "Do you think she knew how to play him? I bet she had to put on quite a show, never knowing if he'd one day see through her." These whispers planted seeds of doubt that grew like weeds in his mind. He began to see Scarlett's kindness as calculated, her support as a performance, and their love as a cleverly crafted deception. Scarlett, seemingly oblivious to Henry's internal struggle, continued to be the pillar of strength and love that she had always been. She would cook his favorite meals, read to him from the books he loved, and listen patiently as he rambled about trivial matters. Yet Henry found himself pulling away from her touch, shrinking from her affection, as though it burned. He would catch himself analyzing her expressions during their conversations, looking for signs of the real Scarlett hiding beneath the surface. Was it real love, after all? He asked himself this question dozens of times a day, each repetition driving a wedge deeper between them. The doubt consumed him, turning his once clear feelings into a murky swamp of confusion and fear. In moments of rare honesty, Henry would try to talk to Scarlett about his confusion, but the words would catch in his throat. He would open his mouth to express his doubts, to ask her if any of it had been real, but instead, he would make excuses about work stress or post-surgery anxiety. Scarlett would look at him with those eyes, now so familiar and yet so foreign, and he would see the hurt in them, the confusion at his sudden coldness. The blind groom's revelation had been a moment of potential clarity, but now it felt like the beginning of a slow unraveling. Henry was trapped in a cycle of doubt and insecurity that he couldn't break free from, even as he watched it destroy the one good thing in his life. The final blow came during a quiet evening at home. Scarlett had prepared a meal that reminded Henry of the early days of their relationship. A simple yet lovingly prepared dish that had been one of his favorites. As they ate in silence, Henry studied her face, searching for some sign of the woman he had fallen in love with. Instead, he saw only a stranger, a woman whose motives and true feelings were as mysterious to him as they had been on the day they met. "I need to know," he blurted out, his voice breaking the tense silence. Scarlett looked up, her eyes wide, with surprise. "Know what, Henry?" she asked gently. "Was any of it real?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Our conversations, our connection, was any of it real? Or was I just a project to you? A blind billionaire who needed someone to complete him?" Scarlett's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "How could you even ask that?" she whispered. Henry didn't have an answer, only the cold weight of his doubt pressing down on him. As the days turned into weeks, Henry's doubt continued to fester, poisoning the love they had once shared. He began to see their entire relationship through a new lens, one of suspicion and insecurity. Every kindness Scarlett showed him was suspect. Every moment of intimacy felt forced. From darkness to betrayal wasn't just a fear anymore. It was a reality that Henry was living, despite Scarlett's desperate attempts to reconnect. He wondered if he would ever find his way back to the man who had loved without sight, or if he was doomed to wander in this new darkness of doubt, forever questioning the reality of a love that had once felt so true. The outside world began to creep into their lives like a virus, spreading doubt and mistrust where once there had been only love and trust. Friends, family, and even strangers started to question the authenticity of Henry and Scarlett's relationship. At social gatherings, Henry noticed people whispering as he passed by, their eyes darting between him and Scarlett. The blind billionaires? Awakening had become a subject of fascination and gossip among the elite circles they moved in. Rumors began to circulate that Scarlett was after Henry's fortune, that she had been playing a role all along, that their love was nothing more than a cleverly crafted performance. These whispers planted seeds of doubt in Henry's mind that grew like weeds, choking the love they had once shared. Henry's business associates joined the chorus of skeptics. During board meetings, he would catch sideways glances and hear muttered speculations about Scarlett's true intentions. "Do you really think she stayed with you all those years without seeing your face?" one colleague asked during a lunch meeting. "What do you think she's getting out of it now that you can see?" These questions gnawed at Henry, making him question whether Scarlett's love had ever been genuine or if it had been a calculated move all along. From darkness to betrayal felt like an inevitable path, now that the world had cast their relationship in a new light. Scarlett, unaware of the growing storm of doubt around them, continued to be the supportive and loving wife she had always been. She organized charity events, attended social functions by Henry's side, and navigated the complexities of their social circle with grace and poise. But Henry's perception of her was gradually shifting. He began to see her actions through a lens of suspicion. Her laughter with other guests at parties now seemed forced. Her kindness to strangers appeared calculated. "Eyes open, heart torn" became the anthem of his silent suffering as he tried to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the stranger he now saw before him. The media, always hungry for a story, picked up on the whispers and turned them into headlines. Tabloids ran stories with sensational titles like Blind Billionaire's Wife, Love or Gold Digger, and The Moment He Saw Her, What Did He Discover? These articles were filled with speculative content and anonymous sources claiming to have inside knowledge of their relationship. Henry found himself poring over these stories late at night, his heart aching with every word that cast doubt on Scarlett's integrity. Was it real love after all? Echoed in the darkened room as he struggled to make sense of the swirling chaos around them. Scarlett's friends tried to reassure her that Henry's doubts were unfounded and would pass with time. "He's just confused and scared," Lena, her closest friend, told her during a tearful conversation. "Give him time to adjust." But Scarlett could see the change in Henry's eyes, the coldness that had replaced the warmth. She tried to talk to him about the rumors and the media's intrusion, but Henry would shut down the conversation, claiming it was nothing but post-surgery anxiety. Love beyond sight had been their truth, but now it seemed like a distant dream as the outside world encroached on their once private haven. As the whispers grew louder and more persistent, Henry's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would follow Scarlett around the house, studying her movements as though she were an actor performing a role. He would question her about insignificant details from their past, searching for inconsistencies that might confirm his worst fears. The face behind the voice had once been a concept of intimate connection, but now it represented the barrier between them, a barrier built by the world's influence and fueled by Henry's insecurities. Scarlett felt the relationship slipping away, one doubt at a time, and there seemed to be nothing she could do to stop it. The final blow came during a charity gala they had once looked forward to attending together. As Scarlett walked the red carpet beside Henry, her hand resting gently on his arm, flashes of cameras and the murmur of the crowd surrounded them. Reporters grilled Henry about his recovery and its impact on his relationship with Scarlett. "Mr. Carrick, how does it feel to finally see the woman who supported you through everything?" one shouted. Henry hesitated, his gaze flickering to Scarlett's painted smile. For a moment, the weight of the world's influence pressed down on him like a physical force. "It's complicated," he replied, his voice barely audible over the din. Scarlett's smile faltered, and as they moved away from the cameras, she knew that their love had been irrevocably changed by the words and whispers of those around them. Scarlett stood motionless in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat as she witnessed the scene before her. Henry was sitting at his desk, his back straight and posture rigid, his newly sighted eyes fixed intently on the screen of his laptop. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the desk lamp, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the emotional darkness that had settled between them. She could feel the distance radiating from him like a physical force, pushing her further, away with each passing moment. Her heart ached with a familiar pain that had become a constant companion in recent weeks. "He's slipping away," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible as tears threatened to spill over. The realization had crept up on her gradually, like a slow-moving tide that she had been powerless to resist. At first it was just small signs, the way Henry would hesitate before meeting her gaze, the way his touches had become more mechanical and less affectionate. But now, it was impossible to deny. The man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once seen her soul without ever laying eyes on her, was fading before her very eyes. In his place was a stranger, a man consumed by doubt and insecurity, a man who questioned everything they had shared. Love beyond sight had been their truth, but now it seemed like a distant memory, a beautiful lie that had been torn apart by the harsh light of reality. She had tried everything to reach him, romantic gestures, heartfelt conversations, even giving him space in the hope that distance would bring him back to her. But nothing worked. Each attempt was met with cold indifference or outright rejection. Henry would push her away, his words cutting like knives. "I need space," he would say, his voice devoid of the warmth that had once made her heart flutter. "I need time to think." Scarlett had given him space, had given him time, but the only thing that had changed was the depth of her heartbreak. The outside world seemed to conspire against them. Friends who had once been supportive now offered sympathetic looks that made Scarlett's blood boil with frustration. Family members would call to check on her, their voices filled with concern, that only served to remind her of what she was losing. And the media, vultures circling a carcass, continued to sensationalize their story, painting Scarlett as the opportunistic wife who had used Henry's blindness to her advantage. Each article, each whisper, each rumor drove another wedge between them. The blind billionaire's awakening had become a narrative of betrayal and deceit, and Scarlett was powerless to change the perception. On particularly difficult days, Scarlett would retreat to the small garden behind their mansion, a place that had once been a sanctuary for their love. She would sit on the weathered bench, her fingers trailing over the leaves of the plants that Henry had once helped her tend. He had loved the garden, had spent hours there with her, learning the names of the flowers through her descriptions. Now the garden felt like a tomb for their love, a silent witness to its slow death. The moment he saw her had marked the beginning of the end, and the garden was where Scarlett came to mourn what they had lost. The physical manifestation of her heartbreak was impossible to ignore. She lost weight, her appetite diminished by the constant ache in her chest. Dark circles formed under her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent replaying their conversations and wondering where it had all gone wrong. Friends would comment on her appearance, their concern genuine but unwanted. Scarlett would smile and assure them she was fine, but the lie grew thinner with each passing day. She was anything but fine. She was a woman watching her love disintegrate, piece by piece, with no idea how to stop it. In the quiet moments when Henry was asleep or occupied, Scarlett would allow herself to feel the full weight of her emotions. She would curl up on their bed, the bed that had once been a place of intimacy and connection, and cry silently into her pillow. Her tears were for the love they had lost, for the man who was slipping away, and for the future they had planned, together that now seemed impossible to reach. From darkness to betrayal wasn't just a fear anymore, it was her reality. And as much as she wanted to fight, as much as she wanted to claw her way back to the man she had married, Scarlett began to wonder if some wounds were simply beyond healing. Henry returned home late that evening, exhaustion etching lines into his face. The stress of work and the lingering emotional turmoil had taken a toll on him. As he entered the dimly lit living room, he noticed a small, ornate box sitting on the coffee table. It was an object he recognized immediately. A gift from Scarlett, given to him on their first anniversary. He picked it up, running his fingers over the smooth surface, and opened it. Inside lay a collection of letters, neatly folded and tied with a ribbon. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized his own handwriting on the envelopes. These were the letters he had written to Scarlett during the early days of their relationship, when his business had been on the brink of collapse, and he had poured out his fears and hopes to her. He had thought they were lost, discarded during a move years ago. His hands trembled as he untied the ribbon and began to read. The words he had once written with such sincerity now felt like a foreign language, a reminder of a man he no longer recognized. As he progressed through the letters, he discovered something that made his breath catch. Annotations in Scarlett's handwriting, detailing the sacrifices she had made to support him. There were notes about late-night calls she had taken from his business partners, about meetings she had attended in his place when he was too overwhelmed, about the job she had given up to be his full-time support. "She married his soul" wasn't just a phrase. It was a documented reality that Henry had been blind to, both literally and figuratively. The letters revealed a side of Scarlett that Henry had never fully understood. She had taken on roles and responsibilities that had allowed him to focus on his recovery and business. She had been his eyes, his ears, and his strength, all while managing her own ambitions and dreams. There were receipts tucked between the pages, showing late-night takeout orders during his darkest moments, payments for medical equipment he no longer used, and tickets to events they had planned but never attended. Henry's vision blurred as tears welled up, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization of how much he had taken for granted. He made his way to their bedroom, the letters still clutched tightly in his hand. Scarlett was already asleep, her face peaceful in the moonlight. Henry sat beside her on the edge of the bed, his heart heavy with remorse. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. The letters had opened his eyes in a way that his surgery never could. They had shown him the depth of Scarlett's love and sacrifice, things he had been too consumed by his own insecurities to see. The blind groom's revelation wasn't about regaining sight. It was about finally seeing the truth that had been there all along. The next morning, Scarlett awoke to find Henry gone. She sat up, her heart sinking at the familiar emptiness beside her. But then she noticed a note on the nightstand. "I need to talk to you," it read. "Please meet me in the garden at noon. Have things to say that can't wait." Scarlett's hands trembled as she read the words, a mix of hope and fear welling up inside her. She dressed carefully, selecting a simple dress that she knew Henry had always liked, and made her way to the garden. Henry was already there, standing by the weathered bench where they had shared countless moments of joy and sorrow. He turned as she approached, his eyes, now clear and focused, meeting hers with the intensity she hadn't seen in months. "I found the letters," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I realized how much I've missed. How much I've misunderstood." Scarlett's breath hitched, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Your love wasn't a performance," he said softly. "It was real. And I was a fool to doubt it." Tears filled Scarlett's eyes as Henry stepped forward and took her hands in his. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." As they stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the garden that had once been a symbol of their love, Henry finally understood the depth of Scarlett's sacrifice. He saw now that her love had been a silent force, holding him up when he had been too weak to stand on his own. Love beyond sight wasn't just a mantra, it was the truth that had guided them from the beginning, even when he had lost sight of it. And as Henry looked into Scarlett's eyes, truly saw her for the first time, not just with his eyes but with his heart, he knew that their journey was far from over. But for the first time in months, he felt hope. Not just for their future, but for the possibility of healing and rediscovery. Henry stood in the doorway, his heart pounding as he watched Scarlett pack her things. The room was filled with the quiet sounds of fabric rustling and zippers closing, each noise a reminder of what he was about to lose. The realization hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and leaving him momentarily speechless. "Scarlett." "Wait," he said, his voice breaking ever so slightly. She turned to face him, her eyes red and swollen from tears, but her expression resolute. "I can't stay here anymore, Henry," she replied, her voice steady despite the pain. "I deserve to be seen for who I truly am, not doubted and pushed away." Henry's chest tightened as he took in the determination in her eyes. This was it. The moment. He would lose the woman he loved, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Memories flooded his mind as he struggled to find the words to beg for her forgiveness. He remembered the early days of their relationship, when their love had been pure and untainted by doubt. He recalled the countless nights she had stayed by his side, offering comfort and support when he had needed it most. The moment he saw her had marked the beginning of the end. But it was only now, as he stood on the brink of losing her forever, that he truly understood what he was about to lose. "I was wrong," he said, his voice trembling. "So wrong about everything. I let my fears and insecurities cloud my judgment, and I'm so sorry." Scarlett's expression softened slightly, but she didn't move toward him. "It's too late for apologies. "Henry," she replied softly, "you've made your choice." Desperation clawed at him as he watched her continue packing. He knew he was running out of time, that the opportunity to make things right was slipping through his fingers like sand. "Please, Scarlett," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "Give me another chance. I'll do anything to make this right." Scarlett turned back to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What if I'm not enough?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What if you look at me and still see the stranger you've been pushing away?" Henry's heart ached at her vulnerability, a side of her he had rarely seen in recent months. "You've always been enough," he said, his voice steady now. "More than enough. I was the one who couldn't see that." He took a step forward, his hand reaching out to touch hers. For a moment she hesitated, then pulled away, her expression pained. "I need time, Henry," she said. "Time to heal and figure things out." As Scarlett continued packing, Henry's mind raced. He needed to find a way to show her how much he had changed, to prove that his love for her was real and unwavering. He remembered the letters she had written to him during his darkest days, letters filled with hope and encouragement that had sustained him through impossible times. He had taken them for granted, just as he had taken her love for granted. Now he wished he could go back in time and cherish every moment they had shared. "I love you," he said, the words catching in his throat. "I've always loved you, even when I didn't deserve you." Scarlett's tears fell freely now, but she didn't look at him. "Love isn't enough, Henry," she said softly. "Not anymore." The finality in her voice shattered something inside him. Henry sank to his knees in the middle of the room, his hands covering his face as tears streamed down his cheeks. He had let fear and doubt ruin the most beautiful thing in his life. He had let the world's influence poison his love for Scarlett. And now, as he watched her finish packing and head for the door, he knew that he was about to lose her forever. The face behind the voice had been his revelation, but it had come too late. He had seen her face, but he had forgotten to see her heart. And as the door closed behind her, Henry realized with crushing clarity that he had lost not just a wife, but the one person who had truly understood him. The regret hit him like a tidal wave, drowning him in the weight of what he had thrown away. Henry stood in the empty room, the silence echoing around him like a deafening roar. Scarlett was gone, and with her, the love he had once thought unshakable. The house felt cold, the walls closing in on him as reality set in. He had been such a fool, blinded by doubt and fear, pushing away the one person who had truly seen him, not just his face, but his soul. Love beyond sight had been their truth, and he had thrown it away. Now, as he stared at the closed door, where Scarlett had walked out, he knew he had to fight desperately, to win back the love he had taken for granted. He started by reaching out to friends and family members who had witnessed their journey. He asked for their help, their support, and their honest opinions on whether redemption was even possible. Henry's mother, Margaret, was the first to respond. "You have to show her you've changed," she advised, her voice firm but compassionate. "Actions speak louder than words, Henry." Heeding her advice, Henry began making small but meaningful changes to his life. He sold off some of his business interests to focus on what truly mattered, donated generously to charities Scarlett had always supported, and even started volunteering at a local center for the visually impaired, a cause close to his heart and theirs. Next, he sought the assistance of Lena, Scarlett's closest friend and confidant. It wasn't easy. Lena was understandably skeptical and guarded. "You hurt her deeply, Henry," she said during their tense meeting at a cafe. "Do you have any idea what she's been through?" Henry hung his head in shame. "I know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right." Lena studied him for a long moment, then nodded, slowly. "I'll talk to her," she said finally, "but I can't promise anything." As weeks turned into months, Henry dedicated himself to the difficult task of rebuilding trust. He wrote letters to Scarlett, pouring out his heart and soul on paper, expressing his deepest regrets and undying love. He sent her small but thoughtful gifts, her favorite flowers, a book she had once mentioned wanting to read, a necklace reminiscent of their early days together. He even organized surprise encounters, hoping to catch a glimpse of her and show her that he was serious about change. Each attempt was met with resistance, each rejection cutting deeper. But Henry refused to give up. The turning point came on, a rainy afternoon when Henry received a call from Lena. "She's willing to meet you," she said, her voice cautious yet hopeful. "Just one chance, Henry. Don't blow it." Henry's heart raced as he prepared for the meeting. He chose a neutral location, a small cafe they had frequented in the early days of their relationship. When Scarlett finally walked in, Henry's breath caught in his throat. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed with pain, but still as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. "Scarlett, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Henry began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "But I need you to know how sorry I am. I was blind, not just to your love, but to the amazing woman you are. I took you for granted, and I'm so sorry." Scarlett listened in silence, her expression unreadable. Henry continued, recounting the steps he had taken to change, his work with the visually impaired community, his donations to her favorite causes, his efforts to be a better person. "I'm not asking for another chance because I need it," he said finally. "I'm asking because you deserve it. You deserve to be loved without doubt, without fear, and without hesitation." Scarlett's eyes welled with tears as she listened to Henry's heartfelt plea. She had missed him terribly, but fear and pride had kept her from reaching out. "I want to believe you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But how do I know you've truly changed?" Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring. Not an engagement ring, but a simple band that symbolized their journey. "I can't promise perfection," he said, "but I can promise to keep trying, to keep fighting for us, every day, for as long as it takes." Scarlett stared at the ring, then at Henry's outstretched hand. The decision weighed heavily on her heart, but as she looked into his eyes, those eyes that had finally learned to see, the love they had once shared began to flicker back to life. Henry stood at the edge of the garden, the morning light filtering through the trees in golden streams. He had come so far since his surgery, the months of doubt, the heartbreak, and the desperate fight to win back the love he had almost lost. Now, as he waited for Scarlett, he felt a sense of peace settle over him like a warm blanket. The journey had been arduous, but it had led him to a profound realization. True sight wasn't just about seeing with his eyes, but with his heart. Scarlett arrived, her presence filling the space around him with a familiar warmth that made his chest tighten. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, the fear that he might hurt her again. But today was different. Today, he was determined to show her that he had changed. He had learned that love wasn't about appearances or the world's judgments. It was about the heart, the soul, and the unbreakable connection they had shared from the beginning. He took her hands in his thumbs brushing over her knuckles in a gesture of comfort. "Scarlett," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I want you to know that I see you now, not just with my eyes, but with my heart. I see the love, the strength, and the incredible beauty that have always been there, even when I was too blind to recognize them." Scarlett's eyes glistened with tears as she listened, her breath hitching slightly. Henry continued, his gaze never leaving. "Hers, the real beauty wasn't in the image of your face. It was in the way your voice comforted me in the dark. The way your touch grounded me when I felt lost, and the way your love remained constant even when I didn't deserve it. Love beyond sight wasn't just a phrase we used to get through hard times. It was the truth that held us together. Scarlett's tears fell freely now, but they were tears of hope rather than sorrow. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Henry shook his head. "You could never lose me, Scarlett. I was the one who walked away, but I'm here now, and I'm not letting go again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, offering it to her with a trembling hand. Inside was a delicate pendant shaped like a heart, engraved with the words, "Love beyond sight." "This isn't a promise of perfection," Henry said softly. "It's a promise to keep fighting, to keep seeing you with my heart, and to keep loving you in every way I can." Scarlett took the pendant, her fingers brushing against his as she did. "I'll always be here, Henry," she replied, her voice steady with newfound certainty. "Through everything." As they stood together in the garden, the world seemed to fall away. The doubts, the fears, and the pain of the past months dissolved in the warmth of their renewed bond. Henry had finally understood that the beauty he had sought wasn't something he needed to find. It had been with him all along, in the love of the woman who had chosen to see his soul. In the end, their love wasn't defined by sight or appearance, but by the depth of their connection and the strength of their hearts. Henry and Scarlett had navigated the darkness and emerged with a love that was brighter and more resilient than ever before. Henry and Scarlett's journey has shown us that love isn't found in appearances, but in the connection of souls. Through darkness and light, doubt and redemption, they've taught us that true sight comes from the heart. As their story reaches this turning point, we want to hear from you. What moved you most in their journey? Did you expect their love to survive the trials of sight and doubt? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know if you'd like to see more stories like theirs. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, remember to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales of love, loss, and redemption. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on Henry and Scarlett's future together.